Sharm slumped forward onto her elbows, giving the goblin a cold, hard stare. Undeterred, the goblin took another gulp of his rumsy rum and continued to tell his overly animated story. The Salty Sailor Tavern was relatively busy this evening, with every table and chair occupied. Some female night elves had taken residence upon the bar, legs crossed and blowing kisses down at some appreciative dwarves. Sharm's companion, Athenist, nudged her playfully. "Sounds like he's getting to the good bit now, eh?" he snickered, nodding at the goblin. Sharm glared back at Athenist, raising one eyebrow. "How many has he had?" she inquired jokingly. Everyone knew that this local goblin could drink more than a fish in water. Half-cut, the goblin had stumbled to his feet and managed to drag himself up onto the table, all the better to tell his tale. Watery-eyed and jelly-kneed, he leant forward into Sharm's face, exposing her to his full-on heated rum breath and a row of very uncared-for teeth. "All right, sailor, that's enough." Athenist rose and picked up the goblin by his weathered shirt. Plonking him down into his chair, he turned to Sharm. "Why do we always get left with the vagabonds?" he moaned, rolling his eyes. Just then, the sound of a heavy fist meeting a tabletop boomed out across the room. Sharm and Athenist both turned their heads to see what was going on, unaware that the goblin had fallen off of his chair and passed out in an unsightly mess on the floor. Athenist cheered when he saw who the cause of the commotion was. "Raìdin!" The hefty Tauren warrior looked over to where Athenist was waving his arms over his head. Swinging his shield with ease onto his back, he strode over to the blood elf. Giving a look of reverence, he suddenly grabbed Athenist into a choking embrace. "Athenist," he gruffed, "it has been too long, brother." Sharm chuckled at Athenist's choked expression. "Think you might want to loosen it up a little there, warrior?" Raìdin let an appreciative Athenist loose with a hearty laugh. "Sharm, been playing with your food again?" Raìdin gestured at the goblin, curled happily around the table leg and snoring like a baby. "Seems so," she replied, smiling. "Who have you got over there with you?" She nodded towards the table that Raìdin had been seated at. Two shadowy figures sat close together, talking intensely. Raìdin shifted his weight uncomfortably. "You don't know them. Their names are Khroen and Parantaja, night elf and human. We have some business to discuss." Athenist turned to him. "Alliance? Not like you to associate yourself with them. Must be some pretty interesting business if you need help from the Alliance." He chose to ignore the dirty glance from Sharm. An awkward silence fell over the three of them as each mused over what had been said. Sharm stood up abruptly and smoothed down her dress. "Well then, if it's business you're discussing, then I assume you need help with something. And if you need help with something, then you can count Athenist and me well and truly in." Before Raìdin had a chance to reply, she gathered up her staff, jumped neatly over the snoozing goblin, and was making her way over to the shadowy table. Sharm seated herself rudely between the night elf Khroen and the human Parantaja with a big grin. "Hi there, what are we discussing that is so hush-hush?" Khroen and Parantaja glanced at each other, and then over at a sulking Raìdin, closely followed by an excited Athenist. Sharm openly examined the two alliance. Khroen wore a plate helm which made it hard to distinguish his features, but his bright eyes shone intensely from underneath. Parantaja had a gentler look. Her brown locks framed her pale face and chocolate eyes. An air of wisdom radiated from her. Athenist leant up against the edge of the table whilst Raìdin pulled up a stool. Sharm wasn't entirely sure it would take his weight. "Gentlemen, ladies," began Raìdin, "we have two new additions to our party." He gestured towards Sharm and Athenist. Khroen and Parantaja nodded once. Athenist coughed awkwardly. "They have been made aware of our situation." "You mean your need for help?" Athenist interjected. Sharm sighed. "Well, I'm Sharm and the blonde one over there is Athenist. We're here to assist you with whatever you need." Parantaja silently reached into her backpack and pulled out a crumpled scroll. "Here," she said simply, offering the scroll to Sharm. Sharm frowned and unrolled it carefully. Divination, Gorfiend's armour. Vulgar is the spawn of Deathwing. He flies in an endless circle atop a mountain in Shadowmoon Valley. You must recover Gorfiend's armour by defeating Vulgar. Only then will you be able to continue on your journey. Ancient Shadowmoon spirit. Athenist snorted. Piece of cake. Khroen turned to Athenist. You have seen Vulgar, haven't you? He asked. Athenist looked sheepish and shrugged. Let me explain, he continued. Vulgar is a dragon, and an elusive one at that. You can only see him with these. He held out a pair of shiny spectacles. Our only hope at defeating him lies with these. They allow us to see into the ghost world of Shadowmoon Valley, which is where Vulgar resides. Sharm fidgeted in her chair. She had heard about Vulgar before. Defeating him wasn't going to be the least of their problems. The mountain upon which he circles is extremely perilous. Many a travelling hero had fallen to their death whilst trying to reach its peak, not to mention all the Dragonmaw orcs waiting below. Now she could see why Raìdin had been so uncomfortable with discussing this earlier. A bell rang out in the tavern as innkeeper Skindle called for last orders. There was a resounding groan, mainly from the dwarves, as chairs started shifting and people began to gather up their belongings. Sharm rose and leant on her staff, musing. We're going to need provisions for this quest, she said, nodding to herself. Raìdin and the others followed suit, rising and hurling their weapons onto their backs. They stepped outside. The night was warm and fresh. Creaking planks and fish jumping in the waters below could be heard, instilling a sleepy feeling in Sharm. The others said their goodbyes and slowly meandered off to different areas of Booty Bay to gather provisions for the following morning. It was going to be tough fighting Vulgar. It would take all of their wit and strength to defeat him and reacquire Gorfiend's armour. Sharm hoped they could do it. A gentle footstep behind her caused her to turn quickly. Parantaja stood quietly, hand held out. I forgot to give you these, she said softly. Sharm looked at the spectacles in Parantaja's open hand. Thanks. She took them and slipped them into her backpack. Parantaja smiled. Khroen and I really appreciate your help. She shifted the axe on her back and turned to walk away. Hey, it's no problem, Sharm replied quickly. Gets me away from that drunken old goblin. She heard Parantaja chuckle as she slipped into the shadows.